Hey everybody, it's Jackie Luqman,
And at the Shaheed.
and we are still here at Jamestown, at the Jamestown Settlement in Virginia. We're actually wrapping up. We're done with the tour, and believe it or not, it exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, mine too.
So what did you think? What are your thoughts
Well,
on the tour?
this is my first time coming here. I actually came here with the idea that I was going to be bombarded with an exhibit that, for lack of a better term, whitewashed. Pardon me. um, that is basically going to be just concentrated on the telling of the European settlements and and what surrounded them. Maybe brief mentioning of the Native Americans, and even under the brief mentioning a footnote of the African experience here. Yeah, they were slaves, and
Yeah.
but no, I was surprised. I mean, it was I really enjoyed it. I thought that they really impressed me with the way that they tried to tell quite effectively, I might add,
hmm
the intersectionality of cultures that that really basically started that started this, what we consider now, this American culture.
Right. Yeah. And we're trying to get the lighting and everything right, which is always hard to do with a cell phone outside. Um, yeah, I grew up, as many of you know, I grew up not far from here in Jarrett, Virginia. Went to school for a few years, elementary and middle school here. Did not learn about the history of Africans in Virginia, let alone outside of the little snippet of slavery that they told us about in school. Didn't learn anything about the indigenous populations that were here before the Jamestown settlers came. And I was really, really very pleasantly surprised to see the depth that they have gone into in this exhibit to really look at the life of the Powhatan people who were here before the settlers came. And they do a really good job of telling the story of the Powhatans, their everyday life, their technology, their traditions, and the interaction with the colonists. Now, of course, they don't tell every bit of the story. I don't know that any museum can tell every bit of the story, but they do a better job of being very clear about who was here first. And they even go into the fact that the reason there are no Powhatan people left is because of the conflicts with the Puritan settlers at Jamestown, and because of the diseases
Right.
that the native population didn't have any defenses against, that were brought here by the settlers. And they go into a great deal of detail
They do.
about the African presence in this country, not just in this country, but in Virginia, because you've heard us talk about the history of Africans in this country, but because the English colonies, because Jamestown is the first English colony, the history of Africans in this colony is incredibly critically important. And they do a really good job of being honest about why Africans were brought here to this colony in particular.
Right.
And the relation and the role they had in in the establishment and the growth of this colony.
Exactly.
And like, some of the pictures we post a little bit earlier, and I hope y'all can actually see us because it's hard for us to see looking at the camera this way. But one of the pictures we posted was of how the Native Americans, the Powhatan Indians, and Africans, supposedly having no connection or interaction with each other, were found to have built canoes in the same way. Now, this was before the establishment of Jamestown as a colony.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this was one of the observations that the English colonists made when they seen the canoes that were being built.
Yeah.
That they recognized that the technology was basically the same or similar to those to the canoe making in West Africa. But I got to say that I wasn't born in the South. I was born in New Jersey, up in the so-called progressive North. And trust me, education, especially in relation to history, wasn't much better, if not the same. I mean, I was really surprised at how little I was taught in school about our place, in this American experiment. And for those of you, and I'd just like to thank Stevie for sharing our video, and thank you guys for joining us. If anyone thinks that this does not have a place in our time, one of the things that I noticed, one of the things that was basically stressed throughout this exhibit, through the exhibits, is the confrontations that took place between the Native Americans and the English settlers, and the oppression of the Native Americans and the Africans, and even the poor whites.
Right.
They talked about Bacon's Rebellion. And so we just came from we just came off of Charlottesville being a headline, and you had you had mainly poor whites who are on both sides of this debate, but you had poor whites who were mainly occupying the white supremacist side in Charlottesville, but you had poor whites and others that was occupying the resistance to that, and so we never basically left the conflict from 1642. I mean, here you're talking about basically conflicts between cultures, and that's kind of understandable considering that they were just now all coming in contact with each other. But here we're talking about 300 years later, and here the conflicts between cultures continue.
Right.
I mean, I think that that's interesting because I think that it has its roots in the founding of this country, and how the founding, my mother used to always say that if you start something off right, it usually ends right. You start something off wrong, you can't never get it right, or it's going to be difficult to get it right. And I think that we can use that bits of wisdom from my mother to see that that this country started off with the settlements in a form of exploitation, slavery, oppression, lying, treaty breaking, all those things to enrich a small group of people.
Right.
The 104 colonists which landed on Jamestown were mostly indentured servants, poor whites, and African slaves, and that were working together to enrich the small wealthy elite. So here we are, fast forward to the clock hundreds of years later, and you still have these same class conflicts. So I mean, we really never that battle has really never ended. Here we are hundreds of years later, it never really ended. So that's why we cannot minimize how important history is into understanding the world that we live in today.
Yeah, I mean, when we were in there reading about Bacon's Rebellion and reading about how Nathaniel Bacon basically was angry that the colonial that the government of Jamestown wasn't protecting the people against unfriendly native people.
Right.
Right. So Nathaniel Bacon and some African enslaved people started to fight the Native Americans, but then the wealthy who wanted to maintain trade with the Indian tribes tried to get Bacon and the enslaved Africans to stop doing that. Not because they were concerned about anybody's welfare, but because they didn't want their money to be interrupted. So that's when Nathaniel Bacon and the enslaved Africans got together and fought against the wealthy and the landowners. And at that point in the history of the first English settlement in North America, that's when the wealthy realized, wait a minute, poor white people and enslaved Africans can never work together. We have to make sure that never happens again.
Right. And to answer your question about, started off wrong, so how can we make it right? I think the first thing that we have to do is to purge ourselves of the racial ideas that we've been indoctrinated with for that length of time.
Yeah.
We've come to view each other through the lenses that was given to us by other people. And right. And so we were given those ideas about each other and basically by people who those ideas had, that for their own self-interest.
Right.
As you just said, Jackie, I mean, when they found out that poor whites and Africans and Native Americans could come together as a group to fight oppression against the wealthy landowners and such, then the wealthy landowners went out of their way to cause division. And one of the things that they used to cause division was to construct this so-called white privilege thing in order to separate the poor whites from enslaved Africans and Native Americans through this manufactured class status. You're not going to be on the level with us, but we all share white skin. So it's in your vested interest, poor whites, to protect us from the savages, and the savages being the slave Africans and the Native Americans. And so we see today that the argument for that hasn't changed. The wealthy elites haven't changed that argument. It's not the hordes of savages now. Now that's you have to protect. It's in your best interest to protect us from white extinction. So we don't become extinct. So that our babies, our babies can grow up in a country where they're not erased.
Right, our white children.
Yeah,
preserving a future for our white children is what one of the people from Charlottesville said.
That our culture is not erased and all this other stuff. It's the same language.
Yeah.
So once again, as we have stated in previous videos, is that we're all being exploited, and poor whites need to understand that too. Middle class whites need to understand that the exploitation, everyone's getting mind screwed by these elites, and I know the word is often overused, but by those that have a vested interest in keeping us apart and a vested interest of keeping alive cultural divisions in order for them to make money. I mean, it was done in the 1600s. While we're fighting each other, and while Native Americans are being exterminated, and while Africans are increasingly being kidnapped and enslaved, who's making the money?
Right. And they did it then the same way they do it now, by giving poor whites the idea that they have more rights and more privileges because they're not like this other group of people than this other group of people, because that's exactly what they did. In the early 1600s, the only people who could vote were landowning men. So even white indentured servants couldn't vote, even after they had served their periods of servitude and they were no longer indentured servants. If they didn't own land, they still couldn't vote. But around, what year was that, 1662? when the laws started to change, that racialized the concept of slavery and
I think it was like
lifelong.
1672.
Yeah, 1672. Because I'm bad with dates, y'all. But there was a time when laws were changed so that even poor white people who did not own land, even poor white men rather, because men were the only ones who could vote at all, but even poor white men who didn't own land were allowed to vote and were allowed to serve on juries and were allowed to serve in different positions, where even free black people, free Africans couldn't. And then the government of the Commonwealth of Virginia started to take land that free blacks did own and sell it. We talked about that the other day.
Right.
So the fact that the government did that, the government of the Commonwealth of Virginia did these things in the 1670s, it couldn't have worked if poor whites didn't go along with it. I mean, that's the thing. Bacon's rebellion had to be violently put down. That's the only reason it wasn't successful, was because the government's might. The government had an army, a well-armed force behind it. But if when the Commonwealth began to change the laws that gave some poor people of a specific group more privileges and rights than this other group of poor people, that never would have worked.
Yeah, and I mean, also you still see the similarities today. I mean, the military and is still used as a apparatus by the wealthy elites to keep everybody else in line.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I mean, you didn't see the army join Bacon's rebellion,
right?
But the army was used as a tool by the wealthy to basically put down a resurrection by the poor and working class.
Right, insurrection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, insurrection. Yeah. And it's the same thing done today. I mean, you know, the same thing with the militarized police force and
mm-hmm.
everything. I mean, it's still used basically to protect the state
mm-hmm.
and to protect, I mean, you can take landowning whites now and put it to the 1% or however you want
right.
to do it. So, I mean, but another thing that I enjoyed about this, about the exhibits was the fact that in school, in our generation,
mm-hmm.
you know, there was no lessons about our life. And when I say our, I'm talking about African Americans. There was never any lesson on, you know, what was life like for African people before slavery.
Yeah.
Well, this exhibit talked about Queen and Hinga.
Yeah, I've seen her name spelled
Njinga,
2 or 3 different ways,
Njinga.
but.
Right, but the Angolan queen
mm-hmm.
who fought a long, protracted war against the Portuguese,
right.
who also was part of a powerful African military alliance called the Imbangawa.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But that basically weren't, you know, strictly good guys. I mean, they were a military alliance that helped protect a lot of people, but they also were responsible for enslaving a lot of other Africans.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you know, just like everything else human, you know, it's not always black and white. It's mostly
right.
gray, you know. But then again, you know, we always talk about collateral damage
mm-hmm.
when we talk about the abuses of humans today or people today. We always talk about collateral damage. And so, I mean, those people that were caught between colonial powers
mm-hmm.
looking to enrich themselves,
mm-hmm.
or even African military alliances that were seeking to not only protect themselves but also profits also, because the Imagawa, you know, when they were capturing other Africans, they were getting paid for it,
right?
You know, through the African middlemen, which
mm-hmm.
one of the exhibits stated. So I mean, so there was profit on for them too. So I mean, so you're still dealing with a lot of collateral damage.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about a lot of innocent people who were caught up in the matrix per se,
mm-hmm.
and the dynamics that still is with us. And you know, just to go back again about solutions. Not only do we have to purge ourselves of the racial ideas that is so ingrained in our culture, so
mm-hmm.
ingrained in our thinking, so ingrained in our institutions. We have to first purge ourselves of that. But and then we have to start rebuilding. We have to really start rebuilding new institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, I've stated this, and I know people say, "Oh, well, that's never going to happen," and that's this, that, and the other. But you can't just cut. You just can't keep cutting off the bad pieces of the fruit, because you ain't gonna have much fruit. You ain't gonna have no fruit left to eat. I mean, pick a new fruit. You know?
You gotta plant a new tree.
Right. So I mean, my opinion has always been that you can reform something that you can reform certain things. And when I mean reform something, if it started out with the idea of justice in mind, we can reform it so it could be even more perfect. But when you got something that started off the way that a lot of our existing institutions started off, and the way that they carried out the duties that were entrusted in them, then those institutions need to be abolished, and new institutions need to arise in their place. Yeah. We also need to really invest in education. I mean, not just the math and science and all of the things that we always associate with education. We need political education.
Badly.
I mean, we really do need political education, and I'm not talking about this touchy-feely, kumbaya, diversity training that is also rooted in assimilationist racial ideas and all those things. We really need education to purge ourselves of centuries, man. I'm talking about centuries of propaganda that have caused us to look at each other through a tainted lens, and not see each other's humanity.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to come down here to the Commonwealth of Virginia, where like I said, when I went to school here, I didn't learn anything about. They barely wanted to teach us about Nat Turner.
Right.
They're still mad at that guy.
But there was a reason for that, and and I guess the reason why I'm so impressed with the exhibits here, because the reasons for that in those times was a lot of it was racial, most of it was racial, but a lot of it was we're trying to create this American melting pot,
right?
So I'm not going to tell you too much about your people's story, because we really want you to be Americans, but yet the thing of it is that American meant that you had to adopt European culture,
right? That
you had to adopt the way that Europeans think, because Europeanism was the dominant culture here. So so it was like you have to assimilate into our ways to be truly American. So in order to assist you in that, we're just not going to tell you nothing about yourself,
right?
You'll just be footnotes, but the main characters in all this will be us. And and so that's the reason why we it's funny that we got this debate on removing Confederate statues and taking down all of this all of these monuments and nameplates and stuff, and all of this stuff dedicated to Confederate characters, and then you got people talking about that's erasing our history and everything like that. And I've heard quite a few people, and I agree with them, that say, some of our history was erased a long time ago, and we're just now trying to get some of that back.
Right. Most of our history was erased. Yeah. I mean, what monuments are there except for a handful to the many Africans and descendants of Africans who rebelled and fought for freedom against the people that these Confederate monuments are up for. Now the sun is back up behind us, so let's see. You want to see if we can move a little bit? Can you see okay? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, look at that. That's better.
That's even better.
That's even better. Okay. So, I mean, so to come here and see that exhibit, this exhibit here at Jamestown, that it is as balanced as it is. It's not perfect, but I encourage anybody who is going to be in the area to come down here and visit Jamestown and learn about the history, that the three parts of human history that collided in this area, the history of the native people who were here and who literally, were it not for the Powhatan Indians, Jamestown wouldn't have existed. Virginia wouldn't have existed, because that first winter, they almost starved to death. And the Powhatan Indians saw that they were struggling, didn't know what they were doing, had no idea, hadn't planted any crops, and so they brought them food for the winter on one condition.
Yeah.
Look, we're going to help you this winter, but by the time the spring comes, we want you gone. Because the native people, the Powhatan people, were here first. Of course, we know that the Puritans didn't leave Jamestown. And we've talked about some of the history from that over on Brick by Brick. But there's also a story of African people who were brought here, who were among the first people to settle this country here too. So I think they did a pretty decent job. But I think it is worth noting that these exhibits, a lot of these exhibits that are talking about the history of the Powhatan people, talking about the deep history of the African people, and like I said, it's not perfect. They didn't make enough of a distinction for me about the true relationship between John Smith and Pocahontas. They still kind of romanticize that a little bit. That was kind of BS.
Even by calling her Pocahontas,
because that wasn't her name.
Right.
That was still kind of BS, but okay. And they also didn't do well enough to differentiate between the type of slavery that was very much like indentured servitude that even Africans, participated in when they captured people in war, as opposed to American racialized chattel slavery. Like I said, not perfect, but they do a much better job than what they've done in the past. And it's worth coming here and seeing this history as a starting point for really delving more into it and having the discussion.
One thing I did notice, though, that I gotta say that I think is hindering progress in this country with respects to racial relations, is that as many white folks that I seen at this exhibit today, when we went to the exhibit, the Queen and Nzinga exhibit that spoke about the African slave trade, the only people that were sitting up in there were African Americans. Yeah. And people of African descent. I told Jackie, I said, wow, it's funny that we go to all the other exhibits and it's sort of diverse crowd. I said, but then you come to the slave trade and white folks bypass that. I think that if we're going to move forward, white people got to start facing that history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I thought that was kind of, interesting that, out of all the exhibits, and trust me, the African part of this story is peppered throughout this exhibit. It's not like it's just confined to one room.
Yeah, it's not like a corner in the back.
No, it's a very impressive exhibit. With theater and everything. But yet, when you look around you, the only people sitting amongst you are black people. So why the white folks ain't coming in there? Why they not coming in here wanting to know more about this story? Because I think that part of it is because it puts a dent in this American myth. We were sitting listening to a white father, with his children, a nice little outing. I thought it was cute. Kids were definitely cute. And he was, basically making the kids recite to him what they've learned, in this exhibit. And I thought it was a very impressive, I used to do that with my own kids. And what were the name of the ships and what were this and what was that? And the kids were answering it and everything like that. I think that if the step further would be with those young minds is to have taken them into the slave, into the African exhibit.
Right.
And let them know, this is a very great country. But it's a country that has a very, that the history we haven't always been kind. This country hasn't always been kind to certain groups of people, and we're trying to make sure that we don't repeat that history. Right. That would have been a very good lesson for these kids to know that, that this actually happened in this country, and that because they're the future, that we want to make sure that no one has to experience that again.
Right.
You know,
Right.
not to ignore it as if, you know, okay, we're going to enjoy, you know, we're going to go to all these exhibits, but we're not going to go in that one.
Right.
You know, I mean, to me, that to me, just to add on to my answer about how we can make it better, white people got to stop being cowards when it comes to slavery. You know, I mean, you know, it has to be where, hey, man, own it.
Right.
You know, I mean, own it. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, and I think that is the sentiment that's been kind of hard to express, not just throughout this last upheaval in Charlottesville, but throughout this whole, however long we've realized that we're still having to fight this fight of racial inequality, racial injustice, and fighting racist ideas that not just white people, because, well, believe me, black people buy into some of that stuff too about other black people. But it's been hard to communicate the idea without kind of being combative, but sometimes you just kind of have to be, because I think that's where we are. White people need to stop being so afraid to confront this part of the history, right? Because people are always talking about we need unity, and yes, the elite is a part of the problem. But here's the thing: the elite can't get away with doing whatever it is they want to do if the majority of white voters don't go along with it. You can't tell me, look, we need to fight the elite, but you're not going to oppose any of the policies that hurt people of color and marginalized groups of people because they don't affect you. I mean, if you just sit on the sidelines and be like, well, I'm not going to deal with that because that doesn't affect me, well, that's going to continue to screw us. And the elite get to keep doing what they do to all of us because they see that you're not going to stand up for us. So they can continue to distract you. This is the key, I think. People are making a big deal now about, you know, all of this being a manufactured crisis to distract us. You know, that the elite, whoever the elite is, whether it's George Soros or somebody else or the 1%, that this is all a manufactured crisis using race to distract us. But then the people who are saying that are directing that at black people, as if we are the ones being distracted. The truth of the matter is, white people, you are the ones being distracted. It's you. You're the ones who have been distracted by letting people convince you that looking out for people of color, making sure that we are no longer marginalized, making sure that we're not unfairly and unjustly targeted and punished and hurt by the system. You've been led to believe that that's this awful thing called identity politics that keeps you from getting what you want. You've been distracted by that. And you continue to believe that. So you turn this solution around to us. You throw this ball into our court, telling us that we've got to fix this problem by not standing up for our rights. We're just supposed to go along with what you want done. And that's how we're supposed to fight the elites.
Yeah, we're supposed to be unified just for the sake of unity.
Right. But the disunity is created by getting the majority of poor and working class white people to believe that black people and other people of color and gay people and the disabled and whatever issues specifically disproportionately harm us, the distraction is that you're made to believe that us fighting against that is the problem. And I think if more white people would invest the time and the energy and the effort and honestly the money to understand exactly how marginalized groups of people have been marginalized in this country from the very beginning, I think more people would understand that the distraction isn't talking about race. It's not talking about racism. It's not fighting against racism. The distraction is that you've been conditioned with racist ideas yourselves.
and stop believing that you're going to be part of the 1%.
Yeah,
I mean, because we understand historically that one of the reasons why so many poor whites didn't oppose slavery and were sympathetic to the South and everything like that, because of, first of all, the manufactured idea of American exceptionalism. This thing that if we work hard and we do this and do that, we could be planters one day and own our own slaves.
Right.
We'll be able to live a good life and everything like that. And so it was like, okay, we don't want to dismantle this institution because one day we may benefit from it. And so even today, it's like so many poor whites are being told that, hey, look, I got here through hard work. I mean, this is what the billionaire class tells us. I got here through hard work, and I got here through my own blood, sweat, and tears. And if you can just hold on and just make this country the way it's supposed to be, which basically means just provide more money and opportunities for me and mine, then you'll be there one day too. But you got to keep the blacks and the Hispanics and you got to the gays. You got to keep all of them at bay because trust me, man, they're coming to eat your cookies too. And then once they come to get your cookies, then you're not going to have enough cookies to pass down. Meanwhile, they have the cookie factory.
Exactly.
So I mean, this thing could really be. America could change overnight, and I'll just put it this way: America could be changed overnight because remember, poor white folks, our brothers in arms, those of you who are our brothers in arms. Remember, poor white people, you have always been their foot soldiers. They can't do this without y'all. You serve in the military. I mean, Donald Trump's kids don't go there. I mean, Buffett's grandkids don't go over there. Nobody. So it's the poor white kids from the Appalachian Mountains and all those places that strap up and go over there and carry American imperialism to other brown people. So if those foot soldiers were to stay home, if the poor white foot soldiers in the hills of West Virginia and in the Midwest and everything realize that, hey, look, we're being conned, and then they start, we have another bacon rebellion on our plates, then we could probably get some things done. Right. But long as they know that they got a few of y'all that's willing to carry the tiki torches and that's willing to believe the lie of white extinction, and it's a lie, to believe the lie of white extinction and the erasure of white culture and all of that stuff, as long as they can convince you that that you're in jeopardy of all of that, then guess what? Then the machinery, the capitalist machinery, the raw capitalist machinery will continue to move on. It's only until the poor white foot soldiers wake up and realize and say to themselves, we don't want to be exploited anymore. You know what? If Trump's presidency is not showing you that, what they really think about you, then I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
If the Trump presidency doesn't show poor white folks, those that thought that he was going to make America great again, if that presidency doesn't prove to you the contempt that they really have for you and your children and anybody else who lives around you, then I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah. And if this period of time in our political, social history in this country doesn't convince you, poor and working class and even some middle class white people, that solidarity with oppressed group of people is the only way we are going to beat these people. They know this. That's why Bacon's Rebellion was violently put down. That's why the Rainbow Coalition that was started by the Black Panther Party and gotten into by Latin what used to be gangs when they started, then they realized, wait, we can do better working for our people. And the Young Patriots, which was not a racist organization, they were just poor white people in Chicago and other and Asian street gangs who were fighting for the same things for poor people in their communities, when they realized, wait a minute, we're all fighting for the same things for our people. We can do this better together. Why do you think the Rainbow Coalition doesn't exist anymore? Because the people in power realized, wait a minute, poor white people and poor people of color and poor marginalized groups can never realize that they can get together and beat us.
And why do you think that when Trump was running for president, and even now, why do you think that his racialized messages were specifically tailor-made and targeted to the white working class? You know, because that's how he survived.
Yep.
That's how people like him survive.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they survive. And they survive by, once again, appealing to their foot soldiers.
Yep.
And
Yep.
let you guys know whether look, don't just think that it's the Klan and the Nazis and all them that they're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
No, they're talking to that manufactured white privilege that they put inside of you, that they convinced you of, and say, look, you know, okay, I understand that the coal mines in West Virginia are closed. I understand that, you know, you're not doing as well as your parents before you. I understand that, but guess what? At least you're white.
Yep. At least you're not one of those people.
At
you know,
least you're white.
Yeah, you're not one of those people living in hell in the inner cities.
You know, and so, you know, so at least, you know, take measure into that. You know, so what we got to do, people, to wrap this up, is we got to be smarter.
Yeah.
And I think that places like this that is unapologetically dealing with our history the way that it happened. Mm-hmm. That's a step forward.
Yeah, it is. And you know, they didn't. I think I said earlier, this exhibit wasn't this way always. This history had to be included in the exhibit only through us pushing for it. Somebody saying, you know what, this story is incomplete. If we're going to tell the history, tell the truth. So that's why we come out to these kinds of places and look to see what's actually being told. So we have a case here in Jamestown where the history is actually being told in kind of a balanced way, not complete, not perfect, but at least it's balanced. But then we see the other side of the problem, where white people who need to know this history so that they can be empowered too, they don't want to know about it. So that's our report from Jamestown, from the Jamestown Settlement in Virginia. We're going to enjoy the rest of our little anniversary weekend. Going to get on the road and hit a buffet or something. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody. And we hope you enjoyed the eclipse, because we did too. It was neat.
Yep.
Peace. Be good to each other. Bye.